could you just talk a little bit more about, you made a comment that you felt the way to the future is not going to be with companies like Murdoch who's trying to tightly control content and get maximum dollar for every piece of distributed content, as opposed to going at it a different way. Could you talk about the different way and give some examples of how that's monetized?
Right, well, sure. So the question is, if the way forward is not to lock up the content and charge the maximum amount of money up front for the content, but something more progressive, I guess, then how would you make money? What would be some ways that you could make money in that model? So I'm a big fan of subscriptions, and I think that some of the services that I consume most actively are subscription-based services, things like Rhapsody and Last.fm and others in the music industry. I pay anywhere from $5 to $15 a month to consume as much music as I want, whenever I want, however I want. And what those services do is that they record the listening of all of their user base, and then they dole out money to each and every content owner based on a pro rata consumption pattern. So I would, for example, love to have Netflix for books. I'd love to pay, $9.99 a month and be able to read anything, anytime for free on my Kindle. I think that would be great. And then what happens is that entrepreneurs and developers, if that subscription-based service is delivered over an open API, developers can come in and build new, user interfaces to that, and doing all sorts of interesting mashups, like some of the things I showed, without necessarily having to obtain any permission from anybody, because they just essentially become a value-added reseller of the subscription model. Advertising is also another way to do that. I think it works well in video. I'm not sure that it's going to work very well in publishing, and I don't think that would be one that I would point to. Another thing that's quite interesting is virtual currencies. We've seen it work very well in video games. I don't know whether it can work in the publishing industry or not, but I think it's worth at least spending some time thinking about that one.
Just a follow-up to that. Taking the music industry as an example, and what you seem to be implying that digital rights sort of going the way of the dodo, at least in some form. We did watch the music industry go through quite a bit of turmoil, during the Napster ordeal, and given that video is currently so protected, in the example you showed us with the TV, if I'm watching a football game and I want to share some play, I mean, right now the laws are very specific around that. Do you see any kind of challenge from the networks regarding the sharing of, copywritten material in this way?
Well, it's hard to get live. It's hard to get live sports into a system like this. The only real way to do that are through services like Justin.tv, where someone's literally putting a camera in front of their TV set and rebroadcasting it. It's totally illegal, but it exists, and plenty of people watch content, live sports content that way on the web, and that'll make it into services like Voxy and others over time. So I think that there will be a Napster-ish kind of thing happening in all of these platforms, and I think the way to get ahead of that is to be more aggressive in licensing your content and getting it out there in legal form so that people aren't forced to do that kind of thing.
Understood.
I'm curious, one of the challenges, I think, for media to innovate the same way that you see in music is there's the editorial nut. You've got to pay for the editor in publishing. And, doesn't sort of fit with the lean startup model. Even though Huffington Post has half of their staff being programmers, the other half is still an editorial entity. Where do you see, how do you see the venture community starting to embrace that type of a challenge? We've been building something. We find we're better off with publishing investors and media investors than tech investors, because there does seem to be a bit of a disconnect between the two.
Well, I think a couple of things there. It's a really good question. The question was, how do you pay for the editor And in publishing, you know, there's still a very valuable role for the editor, and you know, if the value's all in the technology, then you know, how do you pay for the editor? So a couple things. Venture capitalists, you know, have come from the world of technology, and we are comfortable investing in companies that hire a lot of engineers, and we understand the leverage in that, and we understand how to manage those people, and it's a world that we've lived in for a long time. And I think a lot of venture capitalists, when they get into the world of content, they really struggle with that. They're out of their comfort zone. They don't understand the value of editors. They don't understand how to evaluate them and identify who are good and who are not good. And this is one of the things that I've been saying to a lot of big media companies, that I think they have less to fear from technology, venture-backed technology startups, because I don't know how to make good television, I don't know how to make good movies, and I don't know how to come up with good books. And I think there's a role for people who have been doing that for hundreds of years, or tens of years, or dozens of years, depending on the industry, and who do understand sourcing talent, nurturing talent, packaging talent, editing talent. And so I guess one thing I would say is that I think those are the domain expertises that big media companies, you know, will continue to have their advantages. Now, if you want to build a startup company, it sounds like your question is really about, I want to build a startup company, I want to have some editors, I want to have some programmers, but I don't want to just have programmers. How do I deal with venture capitalists in that world? That's a good question. And I think the answer is that there are investors out there who come from the media world, who have come into the venture capital world and have been somewhat successful and are comfortable with one foot in both worlds. And if you look at, you know, the original founding angel investors at the Huffington Post, for example, they were people who came out of the media business, not people who came out of the technology business. They were smart to hire a couple of good developers, and they made a bet on technology as much as editorial, and but they were comfortable hiring dozens of editorial people, and it is something that has to happen more. We're going to need more of those kinds of venture capital firms, and I think one of the advantages that New York has is that I think as New York adds new venture capital firms, and we go from a city with 10 or 20 to a city with 50 or 100, I think we'll see a fair number of those built by people who have one foot in both worlds. But today it still is a challenge.